Hey, it's Zach with Let's Talk About Us. Today, we are covering Harris is not backing away from Biden's democracy focus, but she's putting her own spin on it. This is, of course, taken directly from the DNC and all that stuff that's wrapping up. It's by the Associated Press. I couldn't find an actual left or right article on this to do a comparison. It was all just Associated Press copy paste, even from right wing sources. They didn't even bother to put their own spin or information on it. So I'm just going with the Associated Press, and I'm doing my own digging. And I'm gonna keep on doing my own digging because I need to, with you guys, I need to learn as we go. Right? We need to learn together as we cover the news, as we grow our knowledge. We need to not stagnate. But let's go to ground news and see what happens when I type in Associated Press. Let's see. Yep. Left lean. Only one of them gives it a center rating, which is why I'm glad I fact check things now. I fact checked things before, but now we can see it, right? We can see it in real time. Chicago. Before dropping his bid for re-election, President Joe Biden framed voters' choice in November in dark and ominous terms, painting Republican nominee Donald Trump as a menace to American democracy and questioning whether the country could survive if he won. The Democratic Party's new nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris, isn't exactly shrinking from that message, warning in her Thursday night acceptance speech of extremely serious consequences of Trump returning to the White House. But Harris is putting her own spin on what has been a central messaging strategy for Democrats. Rather than focusing on the existential threat a second Trump term could pose to the country's foundational institutions and traditions, excuse me, she is expanding Democrats' definition of what's at stake this election. It's about preserving personal freedoms. The fresh frame was on full display this week at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where attendees wrote their own definitions of freedom on handmade posters, and Beyoncé's anthem, Freedom, boomed through the loudspeakers. The convention dedicated a day's theme to fighting for our freedoms, with special guest Oprah Winfrey suggesting those working to preserve reproductive rights are the new freedom fighters. Okay, I'm going to pause real quick. I don't like the fact that Oprah Winfrey was invited to the DNC when that woman literally owns over 1,000 acres of land in Hawaii. And she owns it as just a retreat, a vacation spot. Meanwhile, one of the entire islands literally just burned down not too long ago, and the native Hawaiians are honestly, they're living as poor as possible in the best place to live and be poor. It's kind of like being homeless in California. I guess if you're going to be poor, it's best to be poor in an oasis or a paradise. But the point is, Oprah Winfrey is not helping. So having her at the Democratic National Convention, I don't like that. Harris drove the point home how over and over as she summarized her promises to American voters. The freedom to live safe from gun violence in our schools, communities, and places of worship, Harris said Thursday. The freedom to love who you love openly and with pride. The freedom to breathe clean air and drink clean water and live free from the pollution that fuels the climate crisis. And the freedom that unlocks all the others, the freedom to vote. Experts say the Democrats are more positive personal appeal signals that the party is trying to boost morale and reclaim terms such as freedom and liberty. Ideals that the Republicans have spent years branding as their own. They have. At least they've tried. I think everybody on the Democratic progressive side is hungry and was just ready for that positive vision, said Lauren Groh-Wargo, CEO of national voting rights organization Fair Fight Action. Now, Fair Fight Action look up their site, is they're an organization dedicated to preserving people's voting rights, fighting voting suppression. They've been doing a lot of work in Georgia recently, developing new tech to help people vote. If you have the time or the money, it's a great little website and organization to go and help out if you're into that kind of thing. But yeah, just thought I'd give you that. We'll get to this in a second. A word like freedom is abstract enough that people can project their own aspirations for the best version of American society on it, said Matthew Delmont, professor of history at Dartmouth College. He said it's a smart strategy for Democrats to use phrases that Republicans have long deployed, though it doesn't stop Republicans from defining the term in their own way. It certainly does not. Democrats at the convention said they understood why Biden had focused on the threat to democracy narrative. After all, it was his presidency that was jeopardized by Trump's lies about the 2020 election that led to the violent assault on the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to halt the transfer of power. I was going to provide a link on this and cover this more in depth, but look, if you know somebody who is or are somebody who is and somehow found my video and is claiming that the 2020 election was stolen and all those counties, they're all in it together to overturn the election, you're not worth talking to. They're not worth talking to. I mean, that's the highest level of stupidity and conspiracy that you can be on in America right now. I mean, that's the kind of person who would have thought, what was it, Kennedy? No, it was like, I forget what it was. There was a movement or a group of people who thought like some politician that's been dead for years was still alive and was going to come back eventually on like a Jesus Christ story. Anyway, insane people. But Kamala is all about the future, and she can do that, said Holly Sargent, a 68-year-old delegate from York, Maine. She can accept that he was a warrior who got us where we are, and now we need to focus on the future. Biden, who dropped out of the race last month after urgent pleas from within his party, seemed to accept his duty as a messenger of the campaign's new theme. In his Monday convention speech, he said, "This election's results will determine whether democracy and freedom will prevail." Even as newly energized Democrats lean into personal freedom as a pillar of their campaign, the Trump camp isn't willing to cede the messaging ground on that word, liberty, or any other patriotic themes. "It's always good to see Americans express a love of our nation," Trump senior advisor Brian Hughes said. "But a party that has opened our borders to drugs and crime, diminished our standing as a force for global peace, and made it difficult for fellow Americans to afford the basics of life seems like the exact opposite of patriotic." This claim that Trump keeps making, that more people are coming in under Biden and drugs and illegal immigrants is up, is based on two things. It's based on Republicans using all the numbers for both borders and the numbers recorded by ICE altogether. The second thing was that despite them adding all of the numbers at the borders and the two different organizations together as the actual number, what they were also doing is not focusing on the sort of comparison, right? The percentage comparison between how many illegal immigrants Biden dealt with versus how many illegal immigrants Trump dealt with. They both dealt with the same amount, or roughly the same amount percentage-wise. And I think it even said Biden deported more of them. Let's see. Shortly after Harris's acceptance speech, Trump we don't need this anymore. Trump sought to poke holes in the idea that she could provide positive changes for the country. He argued if she wanted change, she could have achieved it already in her current role as vice president. Okay, so the role of the vice president from, what is this, Senate.gov, literally from the horse's own mouth. The Constitution named the Vice President of the United States as the President of the Senate. In addition to serving as presiding officer, the Vice President has the sole power to break a tie vote in the Senate and formally preside over the receiving and counting of electoral ballots cast in presidential election. Today, Vice Presidents serve as principal advisors to the President, but from 1789 until the 1950s, their primary duty was to preside over the Senate. Since the 1830s, vice presidents have occupied offices near the Senate chamber. Over the course of the nation's history, the vice president influence evolved as vice presidents and senators experimented with, and at times vigorously debated, the role to be played by this constitutional officer. Okay. Vice presidents are essentially paper pushers, speech givers, and the occasional, like very occasional, tie-break vote people. I think it had happened once, at least once, in her career so far as vice president under Biden. But this idea that she's like mastermind behind the Biden campaign, that she's like actively contributing to all the things Biden is doing, it's the other way around. Biden's years as president are Biden's years as president. Harris is literally just the person that is in charge of backing him up and doing like a lot of the sort of like behind the scenes work for Biden. She is not the person in charge. She is not the person actively making things happen. She is not this thing that they're trying to wrongly attribute to her. She is a glorified paper pusher, a glorified speech giver. That is all the vice president is. So this idea that the Republicans are saying, well, she could just do this because she was the VP. No. Biden could. But again, Trump, you're not, it's over. You're not running against Biden. That avenue of attack, that whole idea of going after Biden, you can't do that anymore. You're not running against him anymore. And please stop calling her Killer Kamala. Like, you come across so tone deaf when you do that. Why didn't she do the things that she's complaining about? He told Fox News shortly after her acceptance speech. She could have done it 3.5 years ago. She could do it tonight by leaving the auditorium and going to the Washington, D.C. Yeah, what? No, going to Washington, D.C. and closing the border. Again, no, she can't. And Biden tried to close the border. He tried to pass a law because, of course, you can't just close the border. It requires Congress. And Biden tried to do that, and he would have been successful if Trump hadn't called all of his little buddies in Congress and said, hey, don't do that. I want to do that. I want me to look good. Make of that what you will. Harris has particularly leaned into abortion access and reproductive issues as a main talking point since launching her campaign last month. Democrats see focusing on the freedom for people to make their own healthcare decisions as a winning play up and down the ballot. True. As they target Trump's boasting about nominating three Supreme Court justices who helped overturn the constitutional right to abortion 2 years ago. The freedom narrative also has allowed Democrats to create a more expansive campaign message that includes an issue they often have struggled to address nationally: gun control. In a solemn moment at the convention Thursday, 5 people whose lives had been touched by gun violence, including a teacher and a parent who spoke about the Sandy Hook and Uvalde school massacres, stood on stage together and shared their stories. Behind them, the words "freedom from gun violence" stood out on the convention center's main screen. In pushing for freedom from gun violence, Vice President Harris is illustrating how dramatically the calculus has changed on this issue. What was once a political third rail is now being framed as an inalienable right, said John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety, a national advocacy group that works to fight gun violence. To be sure, the Democrats' national gathering did not represent a full pivot from their warning that American democracy is on the line in November. Several speakers, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and former Republican Rep. Adam Kinzinger, pointed to the need to guard American and distinctly democratic institutions. They also issued stark reminders of the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot in which Trump supporters stormed the Capitol, attacked police officers, and sought to halt the certification of the 2020 election. The bustling convention hall showed a rare, quiet moment as videos showing footage of the attack played on screen. Still, mentions of freedom outstripped, and this thing right here, this one sentence. We have video, literal video of that whole event. You can go on YouTube and find it. It's all right there, black and white. The people who constantly try to claim that January 6th wasn't an insurrection are either ignorant or lying. And most often, it's the latter. Still, mentions of freedom outstripped those of threats to democracy, and freedom signs often filled the area where thousands of delegates were gathered. Harris's running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, never used the word democracy in his speech to the delegates on Wednesday, while using freedom 8 times. As the race entered its final months, which that's a weird, why would you mention that? Like, were you annoyed by that, so you decided to mention it? I don't know. As the race enters its final months, Democratic pollster Cornell Belcher said Republicans are likely to focus on darkness and danger, and we're going to be invaded on the border, and you can't afford groceries. Election in terms of future freedom. There we go. Harris, meanwhile, wants voters to see the stakes of the election in terms of the future and freedoms and not going backwards, he said, adding that it taps into American ideals of optimism and often carry the day in elections. Let's get rid of that. Liz Schuler, president of the AFL-CIO and a delegate at the Democratic Convention, said Harris had been successful at outlining the stakes for voters in November while also maintaining that sense of hope and optimism, which is true. If you saw her acceptance speech and more specifically, if you saw like the range of speeches and things that were talked about at the DNC, it was insane. This isn't some esoteric democracy kind of thing, Schuler said. It's bringing down to the ground, showing people how it relates to them, seeing themselves in it. Svensson reported from New York that Fields from Washington, Associated Press writer Chris Magarian in Washington contributed to this report. Wow, I was not expecting to get 2 segments related to this story, but I'm kind of glad I did. I learned stuff, you learned stuff, you've heard my opinion. I would love to hear yours. As I said, I am Zach. This is Let's Talk About Us. Please leave a comment, leave a like, watch the video, have it on in the background. I don't care. But I want you to engage. Use your brain. I want you to hear what I say, hear my opinion, hear what I read, and make your own decision. Think. You are not just some person being told what to do. I'm just a random guy on the internet. But I've presented you with a bunch of information, haven't I? I presented you with a bunch of stuff to learn. So learn. Let's do it. Let's grow together. Anyway, I'm going to say this again. This is the second time I'm saying this. I'm Zach. This is Let's Talk About Us. And you all have a good day. Bye.